A journey across the prairies. On the evening of July 30th, 2008, passengers boarded Greyhound bus 1170 in Edmonton, Alberta. The bus, bound for Winnipeg, was full of people heading home, visiting family, or just making their way across Canada's vast prairies. Among them was Tim McLean, a 22-year-old carnival worker from Winnipeg. Tim was described by friends and family as outgoing, charismatic, and endlessly kind. He'd been travelling across the country, working summer fairs, and was finally headed home to see his family and his girlfriend. That night, he boarded the bus, sat down in a window seat towards the back, popped in his headphones, and settled in for the long trip. Also on board was Vince Lee, a 40-year-old immigrant from China. Lee had moved to Canada in 2001, where he worked odd jobs and lived a quiet, often isolated life. He was known by co-workers as polite and hard-working, but beneath the surface, he struggled with severe, untreated mental illness. In the days leading up to the bus ride, Lee had been wandering across the country, restless and unstable. The two men didn't know each other. By chance, they ended up sitting side by side on that Greyhound bus, a decision that would set into motion one of the most shocking and disturbing crimes in Canadian history. The ordinary ride turns into chaos. For the first several hours, the ride was uneventful. Tim listened to music and dozed off in his seat. Lee quietly sat down next to him, staring straight ahead. Other passengers noted that he seemed agitated, but nothing unusual enough to draw alarm. But as the bus drove through rural Manitoba, approaching the town of Prairie, everything changed. In a sudden, frenzied attack, Lee produced a large knife and attacked McLean without warning. According to witnesses, McLean was sleeping with his headphones on when the man sitting next to him suddenly pulled the knife and began stabbing him in the neck and chest. Passengers screamed in terror as the bus driver pulled over and everyone scrambled to escape. The driver, along with a handful of passengers, tried to intervene but were forced back by Lee's violent outburst. The bus doors locked behind them, trapping Lee and McLean inside. Lee decapitated McLean and displayed his severed head through a window to those standing outside the bus, then returned to McLean's body and began severing other parts and consuming some of McLean's flesh. Witnesses stated that this went on for a few hours. Those outside could only watch the horror through the windows as the attack continued.
I was just reading a book. All of a sudden I heard a guy screaming. I turned around and the guy sitting right next beside me was standing up and stabbing another guy with a Rambo knife, pretty much. It was a big survival knife like this in the throat. Repeatedly. Told everybody to get off the bus. Everybody started to get off the bus. The guy still kept stabbing him. Everybody got off the bus. Me and the trucker that had stopped and the Greyhound driver ran up to the door to maybe see if the guy was still alive or we could help or something like that. And when we all got up, we seen that the guy was cutting off the guy's head. He was cutting off the guy's head there, and he saw us. He came back to the front of the bus, told the driver to shut the door. He pressed the button and the door shut, but it didn't shut in time, and the guy was able to get his knife out and take a swipe at us, so we backed off the door, and I ran around the backside of the bus driver took off, and then we both returned to the front to see what had happened, and he hadn't gotten off the bus. The door was still open. We shut the bus door that time and shut it. It was at that point that he came, started walking to the front of the bus. He had the head in his hand, and he just looked at us like this and dropped it on the ground, but totally calm.
The standoff. Police were quickly called. Officers surrounded the bus, weapons drawn, as Lee paced around inside. Passengers who had escaped huddled together in shock, some crying, others vomiting, unable to process what they had just witnessed. For hours, the standoff dragged on. Lee refused to leave the bus. At one point, he even attempted to start the bus himself, perhaps in an effort to flee, but the driver had disabled it. Officers stood back, waiting for the right moment. Finally, at dawn the next morning, Lee attempted to escape through a broken bus window. He was tasered, subdued, and swiftly taken into custody. The investigation and trial. News of the crime spread across Canada almost instantly, and the details horrified the public. Tim McLean's murder was so brutal, so incomprehensible, that it left the nation in collective shock. When questioned, Vince Lee gave fragmented answers. He claimed voices in his head told him that McLean was a supernatural threat and that he had to be destroyed in order to save himself and others. Psychiatrists later diagnosed him with schizophrenia, noting that he had been untreated for this condition for years. In 2009, Lee stood trial. The court ruled that he was not criminally responsible due to mental illness. Instead of prison, he was committed to a secure psychiatric hospital. Public reaction. The ruling infuriated many Canadians. Tim McLean's family spoke publicly about their devastation, arguing that justice had not been served. For them, the NCR ruling felt like an injustice. Their son's life had been taken in an unimaginably cruel way, and the killer would not spend life behind bars. Others, however, pointed out that Lee was gravely ill, that Canada's legal system is built on the principle that those incapable of understanding their actions cannot be punished as if they did. The debate sparked national conversations about mental health, public safety, and whether Canada's laws were equipped to handle such extreme cases. Release and aftermath. Over the next several years, doctors reported that Lee responded well to treatment. He was described as remorseful, cooperative, and stabilized on medication. Beginning in 2012, he was gradually allowed supervised outings. By 2016, he was granted an absolute discharge, legally free, and no longer under psychiatric evaluation. He changed his name to Will Baker and attempted to live quietly, though media coverage and public backlash continued to follow him. Tim McLean's family, meanwhile, has kept his memory alive through public advocacy, but they remain outspoken critics of how the justice system handled the case. Legacy. The Greyhound bus tragedy left behind profound questions. How do we balance compassion for mental illness with justice for victims? Could this crime have been prevented if Lee had received treatment earlier? And how do survivors and the passengers who witnessed the attack firsthand ever move on from something so traumatic? It's been years since Greyhound Canada's ridership dropped, and in 2021, the company permanently shut down its Canadian operations. While unrelated, many speculated that the bus line might have never recovered from the lingering association with that night in 2008. The case of Vince Lee and Tim McLean is one of the most infamous crimes in modern Canadian history. It's a story that blends tragedy, mental illness, and a justice system grappling with impossible questions. For Tim's family, the pain never faded, and for Vince Lee, now Will Baker, life goes on under a shadow that he can never escape. And for those who survived that night, the passengers who witnessed the unimaginable, it remains an experience that they will never forget.